The healthcare dynamic is rapidly changing. Understanding the basic fundamentals related to the business of medicine empowers practitioners to advance their skills in and knowledge of the business aspects of medicine. SMA's Business of Medicine Simplified program explores the essentials of everything from reimbursement and compensation models, insurance and risk management, to practice employment and business finance. Today we are discussing medical real estate and are delighted to have Richard Campbell, Nancy Ferren, and Peter Jameson with Veritas Medical Real Estate Advisors joining us. Richard is the founder of Veritas, Nancy is a registered nurse who joined the team in 2018, and Peter, who entered commercial real estate in 2014, joined Veritas Medical Real Estate Advisors in 2017. Thank you everyone for joining us today.
Welcome. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Let's start with a basic question that I think everyone would like to know. What is medical real estate and what makes it different from other commercial real estate?
Okay, Jennifer. Obviously, medical real estate, is only dealing with medical office space, hospital space, emergency space, that sort of thing. One thing that makes medical office space different from others, oftentimes it can be a lot more expensive due to specialized build-outs that may be necessary, kind of depending on what each specialty may be for that provider. And one main issue with medical office space is its need for basically retail level parking, high level parking, but in an office environment. And typically the doctors that we work for want to see, more than your average office parking. Most of the time the goal is 5 spaces for every 1,000 square feet or so. And so a lot of times in Birmingham, we can kind of alleviate those challenges by either finding extra space nearby for parking, or sometimes a tenant may have to take more space than they are required to, just to kind of get the parking needs that they want.
As a patient who has gone to doctor's offices before, I know there have been times I've left 30 to 45 minutes ahead of when I normally would, just because parking is at such a premium, and it's something you don't necessarily think about, but that absolutely is a valid concern, I'm sure.
Well, as Peter said, the location analysis with medical real estate is a little bit different. It's what sets it apart. So you're looking for the professional environment, but you do need the retail parking, the retail access, the retail visibility a lot of times. At the same time, having a critical mass of physicians around the particular area is helpful. And so combining all of that with what Peter mentioned, the cost of getting a specialty space built out, or the term that is normally signed to alleviate some of that cost for the tenants themselves, all of that is really what defines medical real estate and makes it different from a conventional office space that, let's say, an accountant might be in.
Thank you very much for this insight. I'm learning a lot just from this little bit of the conversation. Perhaps each of you could share a little bit about the misconceptions of medical real estate. For example, ownership flaw. I would love to hear what each of you have to say about what you feel are misconceptions.
Well, Jennifer, what we were just talking about as far as looking into what type spaces are needed, a lot of times physician groups, office practice managers may look and say, because that the premium cost comes along with the needs that they have and this desire for parking, a lot of times, physicians and their groups will come and say, maybe we should just buy something. Maybe this is something we ought to go find our own piece of real estate and develop on our own. That perfectly makes sense in some cases. However, not always. The cost for new builds or the cost of owner occupying a space is not always what's in the best interest for that practice. A prime example of that is a group So one of their competitors, same specialty, did a new development, owned their own. It looked great. Everything was very desirable by this group. This group is occupying as a tenant rep, and they want to do the same thing. Let's go buy this. Let's go build it. And when we started looking at the numbers and what their practice was currently paying, what we could negotiate for them to get later, as well as comparing that to going out and actually purchasing something and starting from scratch, it made so much more sense for them to stay put, save them a lot of money on that end of the real estate so that their practice could still remain to have the profitability that it did at that point. You have to look at a whole lot of things besides just the real estate, like what's this practice look like? What are the makeup of its members? Are they all partners? Are they half and half associates? Does one own more than the other in the actual practice? Because all of those factors go in. It's completely different, going back to the first question, it's completely different than just going in and buying a building where you're going to have 5 offices, 5 employees, taking space and working out simultaneously together. It's a different setup than that.
So, and to tie on to what Nancy said, the ownership numbers do not always make sense, but very much like home ownership, there is a subconscious perception among physicians groups that ownership is kind of the pinnacle of that world. It's the next step. You start out leasing, and then you eventually do well enough that you can buy your own property, just like you might start out renting an apartment and eventually save enough money to go out and buy a home. And it's not that black and white. It's not that easy. Our focus is on the total occupancy cost of a practice. We can compare the exposure, the financial exposure of leasing versus the financial exposure of a purchase over a 10 or 20 year period and treat them apples to apples. And it's all about the financial exposure for the practice itself. So sometimes it really does make more sense for them to continue to lease space and invest their money in other ventures or new equipment or a new hire, something that will actually create a larger return.
That's what I was actually just about to ask. Do they find they go in thinking that they do want to purchase, and then in the long run, after doing an analysis and looking at everything, realize, leasing may be a more financially beneficial option for us, at least at this time?
Yeah, I think that happens. It doesn't happen a lot organically on its own because deals are forced. The industry, and that's the other thing about misconceptions, is that there's a misconception in our own industry, in the commercial real estate industry, that a physicians group will come forward and say, I want to buy this piece of real estate, or I want to develop this new piece of real estate. And the misconception from our side is, well, that makes total sense. You've clearly got the money, you've clearly got the right practice, and you need the space. When in reality, those questions are not being asked. And so, again, even from our side, it's, yes, absolutely, that's the best way to make money and the best way to make a return on your dollar, because the motivation is for the real estate people to actually do a real estate deal. We like to step in and say, look, if you've got $100,000 that you say you want to use to buy a piece of real estate and put it to work, but I can show you that by staying in your low market value lease and investing that $100,000 into a new piece of equipment, you will get a 90% return or 130% return off the $100,000 on that new piece of equipment, and you'll get a 6% return off that exact same $100,000 in real estate. And I'm somewhat making those numbers up, but that exact scenario has happened before, where the physician ended up buying a new piece of equipment that he wanted. It was paid for in a year.
Wow.
And the useful life of the piece of equipment was 5 years. So he had 4 years of nearly infinite returns that he never would have gotten in a real estate deal that he was assessing. So it really isn't all about the real estate. The misconception is that ownership is the pinnacle, ownership is the best. And it's just, I think that's kind of a myth.
But Jennifer, saying that, there are times where purchasing, becoming owner-occupied does make sense. I mean, we did have another client that leasing didn't feel good about the numbers. She literally was about to sign to release a location that she loved. She wanted to stay in. She felt very much at home with, but something didn't sit right with her. She didn't feel good about what she was reading, and she contacted our office. We started helping her through that process of comparing apples to apples, and that's when I'm talking apples to apples in this case, true occupancy costs, which is what Rich alluded to earlier. It ended up that she was able to actually go out and buy a piece of real estate to open up a practice and owner-occupied, and it made a whole lot more sense. So each case is extremely unique. It's not cookie cutter like a lot of real estate is. Going back to just commercial real estate or residential real estate, people kind of decide, hey, I want to live here, I want to work here, I need this much square footage, this is what I need it to look like, and it's kind of easy. You put it all down on paper and you go out and look for that. It is not that easy with medical. There's so much more to look at. There is more more information that you have to weigh out, and each case, although they may look exactly the same, each case is truly unique.
Absolutely, and you shouldn't just rely on your colleagues' experiences and everything. You really need to look at your own individual situation and turn to the experts who can help guide them through this process like you do, and where it may be a good fit for one, it may not be for another.
Absolutely.
Yeah, some of the worst real estate deals I've seen physicians get into are because somebody else did it. They saw somebody else did it, or someone else reported that, oh, I went and did this and I'm making all this money, or I'm making these returns, or they give some element of the deal that is their perception of how good of a deal they did. But as Nancy said, not every deal is the same, and the nuance from one to the other could mean disaster for one physician when he saw it seemingly work for his friend from medical school down the street. And so you've really got to be careful, especially with, they're friends, they went to med school together, they still talk a lot, they trust each other, and it's oftentimes they get led down the wrong path because they're just not looking at the facts. Or
the whole picture. Your colleague may just be giving you a piece of their experience without all of the other nuances that may have played into their decision. So you need the complete scenario. Could each of you provide a little insight into the cases that you have worked that helped medical professionals better understand how they can benefit in regard to real estate needs?
Rich touched briefly on this before, Jennifer, but I think one scenario that we find ourselves in fairly often is practice will come to us and say, we need to move, we need this much space, and we're not happy with our current space, but we'll get really involved in their practice needs and look at their space and the flow, and can sometimes kind of find out that they really don't need to move, but they can use their space, maybe redesign what they currently have, and kind of help with the flow, or maybe expand into a neighboring suite if they do need a little bit more space. And so it's not always that they, really need to move. Sometimes we'll get involved, and that can kind of be a big success and help, kind of alleviate a lot of potential headaches that would come along with a move.
Does anyone want to dovetail off of that?
Well, Peter used the word success, and I think that it's so important that we see it as taking care of the practice, even when, and sometimes especially when, it's not a real estate deal. So our focus is making sure that the practices have the facts behind every decision, not the perception of what their friends said in the hallways, like the last point that we were discussing, not their perception of what their financial advisor is telling them they should do, but here are the cold hard facts. And the description that Peter just gave really does happen a lot, where we are able to get them to step back and say, this is what it really looks like. Here is choice A, B, and C. And A is a purchase, B is a lease, but you move, and C is a renewal where you are. And where you came to us dead set on getting out of this building for this reason, and this reason, it really does make sense that you should consider staying in it. And here's why. And so here are the extra costs that you would have, or here's the extra equity that you would put in, or the liability that you would absorb through debt to do option A or to do option B. And we help them weigh those liabilities and risks and rewards in a setting to where we don't care what they do in the sense of a real estate transaction. We want them to walk away saying, we just made a decision with all of the facts. Was it the absolute best and right decision every single time? Maybe, maybe not, but at least we had all the facts. The trouble comes when we get approached by groups that say, oh my gosh, I've got this building and it's, we got talked into developing it and building it, and we overbuilt it, and it's expensive, and we're writing checks every month to keep it afloat. Our occupancy costs are through the roof. How do we get out of this? And we really get excited when we've got the opportunity to help somebody avoid those situations from the start.
And Jennifer, and kind of here again, all of these answers go back to the first question, in my opinion, of what makes us different. Mm-hmm. One of the things that has been said, not straight out, but has been alluded to often, is that there is a huge team approach here, and not just with our team within Veritas, because we do work as a team here of looking at multiple different aspects, but just because the financial planner said it or the tax accountant, et cetera, we've alluded that that doesn't give them the answer, but we do work with those entities very well. And what we find is when a physician group calls us and says, this is what I'm thinking, at that point, we ask for permission to really dive deep with these guys. Let us look at financials. Let us look at where your employees work, where they live, where they live, where do your patients live, where they work, where are they coming from. Let us also talk with your banking institutions, your financial planners, or your tax accountants, or just gather some information from them so that literally we do have a big picture. And then we're able to take that big picture and start honing in on what is your top priority, what are your true needs, what are your wants, and then how do we marry those needs and those wants so that you end up feeling good about what you're doing all the way around, where you're not looking at it later, as Rich said, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have done this because now I'm in this hole, but also, oh, I should have done that because look at the opportunity I missed, that you actually can walk away as a physician group or a practice and say, you know what, I had all of the information that I needed, and I feel really good about the decision because I made that decision very non-emotionally, but equipped with any and all information that I needed.
We've touched on in this conversation some of the successes of how you help them have all of the information and make sound decisions, not emotional. So there's hopefully no buyer's remorse, if you will. If each of you kind of wanted to touch on what you feel may have been your biggest success story, and also what is one tip that maybe each of you would share as physicians look to medical real estate. If there's a helpful hint or a tip, we would love to hear those as well.
Okay, Jennifer, one kind of success story coming to mind. Last year, we working with a dental-related group, and they came to us kind of late in the game. We were not initially involved in their property search, and once we got involved, they were already at proposal stage at a new development that was a pretty costly development. And they wanted the retail exposure, and they thought they were willing to pay these rates. And so we came in and saw the proposal that they'd been negotiated or were about to sign. And they were about to sign a deal that was a 15-year lease with very high rates and high annual increases. And it just really did not make sense for their practice. We don't really think, there's very few times when signing a 15-year lease could really be that advantageous. And so this group ended up actually building on a piece of land that they already owned nearby. And they just hadn't really done the deep dive into looking at the new construction on that piece of land. Kind of just really were focused on getting more of this retail exposure, but in the long run ended up building their own building where, you know, they were the sole tenant, they controlled it all, controlled more of the costs, and ended up being very happy.
To that point, Jennifer, one of my successes, completely opposite from Peter, just to kind of give the other side of the story, is a group was getting ready to renew. The physician just could not stomach every time he reviewed the lease and what the renewal rates were. He just couldn't stomach. He just said, this doesn't make sense. It's too high. I can't imagine that this is how much it costs. And we're talking just rental rate at that point. We're not talking total occupancy costs of everything that goes in with running an office. And so he came and he sat down in the office. We started looking at that contract, and it did make sense. It was not in line with what the market was demanding, and there were little nuances to the contract that this physician group, office manager, et cetera, may not have been able to key in on because they're not coming from a real estate perspective, if you will. That's not their expertise. Their expertise is taking care of those patients when they come in and giving the best care possible, which they're great at. So they look to us for that expertise. We look at it, immediately call the landlord and start working with the landlord and bringing a lot of things to light, such as, you know, the rates are not in market value. There is some terminology in the lease where there have been some escalations that now can go back down. There was a tenant improvement package that was built in, which is very normal. Rich touched on this at the beginning, of in their base rent lease that now should be relieved because the tenant improvement, 10 years old. We were able to negotiate and save about a 30% reduction. A 30% reduction of their rental rate at that point. In fact, at the end of this next 10 years, their base rent was not higher than what they were paying the day they walked in here, which almost, I mean, to this physician said, it feels like Christmas to me. This is unheard of. Things that he would not have known, and they were dead set that they were moving out the door. They were moving, they were going to build, it didn't matter. They would give up location. And we were able to say, whoa, just stop. Let's look at this. Like I said, that whole, you take the emotional out of it. Let's get all the facts together and then make a solid decision. Could not be happier. He still says every time he comes in, it was like Christmas morning. I got the best gift when I was able to sign that contract.
That's fantastic. And it really does reiterate what you all have been saying, that you do have to look at your own situation and not at everyone else's or do what everyone else does. You really do have to look at what is best for you.
So for me, way back when all of this started in 2009, I had a good bit of medical real estate experience, had worked with a lot of physicians, and what really spurred all of this on, this consulting service, was we had a large specialty group come to me and say, we want to go buy that piece of land and build a new 20,000 square foot building on it. And we want you to help us. And for a real estate person, that's a coup. That should be like Christmas morning. You know, they're walking in and saying, look, we want you to be a part of this big deal. And I said, let's stop, back up a minute, and look at your practice. Look at the makeup. Look at the partners, as Nancy mentioned earlier. Who's an owner? Who's not? How old are you? Where are you in your practice life cycle? You got a 65-year-old partner and a 37-year-old partner and everything in between. Everybody's got different motivations. Everybody's got different financial plans. Everybody's got different access to cash and equity. And so let me present the facts of what this deal is going to take to go do what you're telling me you want to do. I'm going to present the facts to you, and I'm going to break it down in a way that you will see every dollar that you're going to have to come up with and what it's really going to mean, and 15 and 20 and 30 years down the road, what it could potentially mean and how you operate between now and then among so many different partners. And then we're going to look at renewing your lease exactly where you are at a below market level, because your current owner does not want to lose you. So they will give away the farm to keep you there. And I'm going to run a comparison on leasing where you are and going and building that gorgeous brand new building that you want. And then we can make a decision. And after 5 months, they decided to abandon their plan to go build a new building. And they signed a fantastic long-term lease. The practice is still around, doing great. And it made total sense for them. And the money that each of the physicians would have had to have put into that investment deal, they were then free to still go invest it somewhere else, or to keep their, their distributions from the practice a little bit lower so that more money could be retained in the practice for their new hire or the next associate that was going to get brought in. And it was so great to sit with them and effectively watch a real estate deal crumble, but knowing that it was the right thing and that they are happy and they were taken care of. And that's really what started this whole thing, is that deal and that experience of there has got to be a focus on what the practice really needs and not let real estate be the tail that wags the dog.
So Jennifer, you asked for a tip. You asked in this first question to give a story and then what kind of tip. And speaking, I guess, from a medically driven brain, that being my background, and now marrying that with real estate, the nugget that I would give, and that I say it to other real estate agents, I say it to physician groups, friends when they're asking me what I'm doing now, is, we pride ourselves in being experts in that field of medical real estate, and being experts in that field is just like finding a physician that has a specialty of what you need. You don't go to a general practitioner for an orthopedic need when you have access in Birmingham Metro to so many fantastic orthopedic groups. You don't go to an orthopedist when you got chest pain. I mean, you seek out the specialist, and that's what makes medicine so successful to patients. And we are really blessed in Birmingham and throughout the Southeast, really, to offer that. We're no different. We're able to offer an expertise in real estate and helping you figure out what it is that best benefits your practice, not all primary care practices, but your specific practice. And that's what sets us apart. And if I could give any tip, and it's the tip that I give a lot, is let us be the handholders. Let us come in and do that. Let us be your internal real estate advisor, real estate broker, whatever you want to label it, so that we're able to help you move to the next level, whatever that next level may be.
That's great advice. Any other tips?
Pay attention to total occupancy cost. And it's easy to say that from our perspective, and most practice managers, CEOs, and physicians would say, what do you really mean by that? And as Peter said earlier today, we could probably do an entire podcast on total occupancy cost and what we mean by that. So maybe we will do that in the future. But that total occupancy cost, so what does it really mean for you to exist there? You have to know. You have to know.
This has been very enlightening. I never really would have thought that sometimes when the deal doesn't go through, that is actually for the best. And it really drives home that you need to look at your situation and all of the information. So this has been incredibly informative, and I would like to thank each of you for your time today.
Well, thank you for making the call. We are happy to be here and happy to be of assistance.
Would you like to learn more about this topic? Make plans to attend SMA's Southern Regional Assembly October 31st through November 2nd in Birmingham, Alabama. Visit sma.org/assembly for more information and to register.